At 7:18 a.m. on March 12, 2024, Robert Jenkins stood in a winter wheat field near Enid, Oklahoma, watching 340 head of Black Angus stocker cattle graze wheat forage that had reached 8 inches tall. The agronomic threshold where continued grazing beyond March 15th would damage crown development and reduce grain yields by 15 to 25% at June harvest. 54 years old. Third-generation wheat cattle producer, 1,200 acres operating dual-purpose system. His cattle had gained 1.8 pounds per day on wheat pasture since November, eliminating $68,000 in purchased feed costs. But removing them now meant trucking to leased pasture at $42 per head monthly or selling into volatile feeder markets, trading $12 below break-even prices. Standard practice said, remove cattle by first jointing stage. Protect grain production. Accept livestock marketing losses. Jenkins had wheat futures contracts requiring 32,000 bushels June delivery, a cattle operation dependent on winter grazing reducing feed costs by 60%, and weather forecasts showing late freeze risk that could damage jointing wheat more severely than grazed wheat. He called his livestock hauler. The cattle would stay another week. They'd prioritize livestock revenue over grain yield optimization and hope the biological resilience of dual-purpose wheat could absorb the extended grazing that conventional wisdom said would destroy June harvest. Oklahoma's wheat cattle dual system operates as America's unique integrated winter wheat production model. 5 million acres providing cattle grazing November through March before grain harvest in June. The coordinating 100,000-plus head of stocker cattle operations with combine harvest producing 120 million bushels annually for flour mills and export terminals. Every fall, producers drill winter wheat varieties bred specifically for dual-purpose performance. Aggressive fall tillering creating forage mass for cattle, cold tolerance surviving Oklahoma winters, and spring recovery capacity regenerating grain heads after grazing removal. The system works through precise timing where cattle enter fields at 6 to 8 inch wheat height in November. Graze through March, gaining 150 to 250 pounds per head on forage costing 45 cents per pound of gain versus 82 cents for purchased feed. Then exit before first jointing when wheat transitions from vegetative growth to reproductive grain development. This is agriculture operating as synchronized biological management, where livestock and grain enterprises compete for the same plant resource. Timing errors cost both production simultaneously, and economic optimization requires balancing cattle weight gain against wheat yield potential across unpredictable weather patterns. Robert Jenkins learned wheat cattle integration from his father, who established the dual-purpose system in 1985, when Oklahoma State University breeding programs released varieties like Duster and Gallagher specifically designed for grazing tolerance and grain recovery. His father had run 180 steers on 600 acres of wheat, achieving modest cattle gains and adequate grain yields, while spreading operational risk across 2 revenue streams. Jenkins expanded in 2006, increasing to 1,200 acres, supporting 340 head, and developed sophisticated grazing management coordinating stocking density, removal timing, and variety selection to maximize combined returns. But intensification created new vulnerabilities. When livestock markets dropped or grain prices surged, the dual-purpose optimization that averaged returns suddenly meant missing both markets' peak opportunities. The economics were dual enterprise dependent and timing sensitive. For grazing phase, Jenkins purchased 340 head of 600-pound steers at $1.84 per pound in October. $626,400 total investment. The cattle grazed wheat November through March, gaining 180 pounds per head to 780 pounds. Consuming forage with production costs of $38 per acre across 1,200 acres for $45,600 total grazing investment. At March sale prices of $1.78 per pound, cattle generated $471,096 revenue against $671,400 combined costs, losing $200,304 on the livestock enterprise. But the wheat grazing phase eliminated $68,000 in purchased feed costs that conventional feedlot backgrounding would require, effectively reducing net losses to $132,304. For grain phase, the 1,200 acres produced 28 bushels per acre after grazing, reduced from 35 bushel ungrazed potential but acceptable for dual-purpose systems. At June, wheat prices of $5.80 per bushel, grain generated $194,880 revenue. Combined costs, including seed, fertilizer, chemicals, and harvest, $186,000. Grain profit, $8,880. Total system results: livestock losses of $132,304, offset partially by grain profits of $8,880, creating net operating loss of $123,424 versus projected combined profit of $84,000. And the dual-purpose system that supposedly spread risk had instead amplified losses when both enterprises underperformed simultaneously. At 9:40 a.m. on March 19th, Jenkins was watching cattle continue grazing while wheat approached first jointing, the growth stage where damage from trampling and grazing became irreversible to grain yield potential. His agronomist had called twice, warning that each additional grazing day beyond March 15th was costing 0.8 bushels per acre in June yield potential. Cumulative damage now approaching 3.2 bushels per acre, or $22,272 in foregone grain revenue. But selling cattle into current markets at $1.68 per pound, $10 per hundredweight below March projections, would increase livestock losses by $26,520. Jenkins faced mathematical certainty. Extended grazing was destroying grain value, but premature cattle sales were destroying livestock value worse. His daughter Sarah arrived at 11:20 a.m. to discuss the dual enterprise trap. 28 years old, holding an agricultural economics degree from Oklahoma State. She'd worked the operation for 5 years while recognizing that wheat-cattle integration had evolved from risk-spreading diversification into a coordination nightmare where timing requirements for one enterprise systematically conflicted with optimal management of the other. Sarah tracked data showing Oklahoma wheat-cattle operations declining from 8,400 producers in 2005 to 5,200 in 2024 as market volatility and management complexity eliminated producers unable to optimize both enterprises simultaneously. Dad, we're keeping cattle on wheat because livestock markets are terrible, but every day we wait costs grain yields. We can't optimize both. That's dual-purpose farming. When one market is strong, we sacrifice the other. When both markets are weak, we sacrifice both trying to minimize losses. Then maybe integration doesn't spread risk. It concentrates vulnerability. Specialized grain-only producers captured $5.80 wheat prices with 35 bushel yields for $203 per acre profit. Specialized cattle feeders avoided this market timing and achieved cost of gain advantages. We're losing on both. Jenkins understood. The dual-purpose system required perfectly balanced markets, where livestock gains offset grain reductions. In unbalanced markets, the integration became a liability. By March 26th, Jenkins had removed cattle from wheat fields. Final livestock economics: 340 heads sold at $1.68 per pound, 780-pound average weight, generating $447,552 revenue against $671,400 costs. Total livestock loss, $223,848 after accounting for avoided feed costs. Grain harvest in June, 24.8 bushels per acre, reduced from 28 bushel potential by extended grazing. At June, prices of $6.10 per bushel improved from March. Grain generated $181,344 revenue against $186,000 costs. Grain loss, $4,656. Combined system loss, $228,504 versus projected profit of $84,000. Robert Jenkins continued wheat cattle operations through 2026, managing grazing timing and market coordination while watching margins compress as both cattle and grain prices fluctuated unpredictably. In spring 2027, his primary wheat buyer, a regional flour mill, announced they were discontinuing purchases from dual-purpose wheat producers and requiring grain-only production to eliminate protein variability caused by grazing stress. Simultaneously, his cattle operation faced increasing competition from specialized feedlots, achieving 3.2 pounds daily gain versus his 1.8 pounds on wheat pasture. He met with Sarah in April 2027 to discuss specialization versus exit. The analysis was unforgiving. Specializing in grain only meant abandoning cattle revenue that covered 40% of fixed costs in average years. Specializing in cattle only meant leasing pasture and purchasing feed, eliminating the grazing cost advantage that made the livestock enterprise viable. Neither path offered adequate returns at current operation scale. Sarah, we built this operation on dual-purpose integration. Separating them destroys the economic model that justified both. Dad, the model assumed markets would balance. Wheat compensating when cattle dropped, cattle compensating when wheat dropped. But when both drop simultaneously, integration amplifies losses instead of spreading risk. Robert Jenkins sold his 1,200-acre operation to a regional farm management company specializing in grain-only wheat production for mill contracts in fall 2027. The sale, $3,200 per acre for wheat ground, plus $180,000 for equipment, generated $4.02 million gross. After settling debt, Jenkins netted $1.68 million. Sarah took a position with Oklahoma Farm Bureau as an integrated systems analyst, using her agricultural economics education and family wheat cattle knowledge to help producers understand the coordination complexity and market timing challenges that had consumed her family's operation. Oklahoma's 5 million acres continue supporting winter wheat production, providing cattle grazing November through March before grain harvest producing 120 million bushels annually. The dual-purpose varieties tiller aggressively regardless of farm ownership. The cattle graze wheat regardless of who manages timing. The grain harvest proceeds regardless of which families coordinated both enterprises. The system persists through biological integration that family operations developed but can no longer navigate profitably when market volatility in both enterprises creates timing conflicts where optimizing one systematically damages the other. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Your support helps us preserve these histories of American agriculture's transformation. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and whether you understand the integration complexity crushing dual enterprise family operations. Thank you for keeping their stories alive.